Hello, everybody, and welcome again to the Risk Matrix podcast and videocast with James Junkin.
Roll Tide. Super glad to be here with you, Dr. Martin. It is great days in safety. A lot of good things coming, looks like, down the pike from OSHA to improve worker safety. And I'm freshly back from a speaking engagement with Berg Demolition. What a great company, and good friend, Chris Brophy.
Awesome. So thanks for James. Thanks for co-hosting the Risk Matrix with myself, Dr. Martin. And we've got another good episode here today. I think a really good topic that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how we do occupational safety and health. We talk a lot about the safety, and everybody always forgets that health component. So we're going to talk about that as a risk factor in what we do as companies and safety directors every day, and what we should be doing in order to cover both components. But before we do that, let me tell you that today's episode of the Risk Matrix, that is powered by Veriforce, is sponsored by Columbia Southern University. Columbia Southern University has quickly become the university of choice for safety professionals, risk and environmental management, and emergency management professionals. Columbia Southern University offers an online educational experience with classes taught by some of the leading educators in their respective fields.
That'd be you.
Learn from the best and maximize your professional and personal potential. Members of the Veriforce Network can receive up to 10% off tuition expenses and free e-textbooks when enrolling. Visit veriforcenetwork.com/offers /Columbia-Southern-University for details on how to enroll and take advantage of that Veriforce Network benefit. So, James, I think we got a great topic today. I'm really excited about it because, I'm an industrial hygienist, but in a lot of safety professionals, risk professionals, companies, what I see, and I don't know if you see this too, is they're starting to take safety and safety management systems very seriously, but they forget about the health.
Yeah, no doubt. In whatever acronym you use to describe safety, HSE, health, EHS, health. And I think what's happening is quickly becoming it's really a big S, safety, and then even a smaller H and even a smaller E. There's a lot that goes into health, safety, and environmental. And in the assessments I've been doing, we're in the assessment season. Some people call them audits. What I find is many people don't have a program, or if they have a program, it's not implemented. It sits in isolation by itself, just to satisfy a requirement of a third-party verification system, but not necessarily used to protect workers that are exposed to these health hazards.
So I will agree with that. And I think that, we've had this discussion before that when you're helping people with their safety management systems, I know this happens to you, it happens to me too. Why do I need a medical monitoring program? Right. And actually all of the safety software systems, including Veriforce, they ask for a medical monitoring program from subscribers. And what is your pat answer to that? Because I kind of always raise one eyebrow. I'm an industrial hygienist, and then I explain it a certain way. What do you tell your customers, clients, and Veriforce Network people?
Well, I think one of the problems, I'm going to answer that kind of in a two-part answer. One of the issues is how we digest the standards. I'm fond of saying this. People read the standards like they read the Bible. Everyone knows what John 3:16 says. Nobody's got a clue what John 3:15 says, what John 3:17 says, what the third chapter of John is about, how that fits in the overall New Testament. Nobody's got a clue. We go to like respiratory protection. We say, where does it say I need to be clean shaven? Oh, right there. Where does it say I do this? And we often miss these medical surveillance programs. Sometimes it's a lack of knowledge. Many times it's a failure to budget. I think there is, in particularly the construction industry and in the oil and gas industry, a tendency to look toward the hiring client or the operator to tell you what to do and manage your safety program. So people are often shocked when they come to find, oh, I've got to have a medical surveillance program. Oh, I'm dealing with lead. I got to do blood in, blood out. My hiring client didn't tell me I had to do that. My operator
What do you
didn't
mean I
tell me
need H2S training?
ma'am.
What do you mean I need H2S
Yeah,
training?
absolutely. They didn't tell me I had to have that. And so there's this awareness. That's why I really like, and that's where my research is going to be in my part of my doctoral program and dissertation is contractors that look at questionnaires. It's almost a pro forma. We go down, we check yes on everything, but we're not implementing what's required from a regulatory standpoint. And these health medical monitoring programs are super important because often the effects are long term. You know, you have chronic illnesses and disease that come about from exposure. With H2S, typically it's an acute exposure. Neither, you know, you get sick right then, you start showing symptoms of exposure, or at higher concentrations, you die. That's not necessarily true when it comes to exposure to things like lead, silica, asbestos. You know, those are longer term. It takes a long time for that to present, but the effects on workers is devastating.
So I want to you mentioned Berg Demolition, right?
Right.
We
Great
both
company.
know that great company, right? We both know their safety director, Chris Brophy, and he's on top of this.
Oh
But
yeah.
I will say that that's a good example, a demolition company, right? And I used to work at a boarding school, okay, and they did a lot of building renovations. And one of the things that you really need to know is you need to know your industry, right? And so let's start
Right.
with something like demolition, right? You need to know what standards apply to building materials. What and this goes back to hazard identification, right?
Right.
Because I know you're going to love this, right? You got to start at hazard identification. Nobody's going to tell you exactly what's in the soup. You have to decide what's in the soup, right? And so here's the thing. If you're demolishing a building, you've got potential asbestos, depending on age. You've got the potential lead. You've definitely got the silica, potential silica. You've got PCBs, right,
Right.
which is used in some of the building materials, caulks, gaskets, etc., and many other hazardous materials that when you knock a building down, your employees are exposed, right? And so, I mean, that came up when you said demolition, right? Because I worked in the environmental field for a long time. And so, are you identifying the health the same way you're identifying the physical stuff? Okay. And then what I'd like you to touch on is, do we do it by project, or do we do it by the suite of services that we offer? And if we do, how do we do that? How do we, our programs that go into these software vetting systems, how do people start to know looking at for their employee population?
Well, everything begins with hazard identification, and where I find most companies have an extreme weakness, and it's one of the most low severity, if you will, programs that's out there that everybody has, and that's access to medical and exposure records. Companies get
Yep.
the medical, they understand medical. They don't understand the exposure record side of things. So what are
Yep.
my workers exposed to? Well, we look at the general exposures of potential for the industry we're in, and then really gets down to site specific, right? Just like we do with any other hazard that's out there. We can reasonably estimate that, for example, at Berg Corporation, they've got a potential to be exposed to silica because they're demolishing buildings that have a substantial amount of concrete. And they do a
Right.
great job of that. They've got a really good industrial hygiene program there. But what about lead? Not every building has lead, but it could lead based paint, lead piping, for some.
PCBs and paint.
Oh, absolutely. So you really got to do a good job in the pre-planning of the work for health hazards, just like you do for physical hazards. You know, silica is nasty. It's nasty stuff. Everybody's heard of asbestos. And we found this a lot in the oil and gas industry years ago. The frac sand we used was made of 99% silica. And there wasn't a lot of exposure controls there for workers. No one's wearing any type of respiratory protection. And that's since changed with back in 2014 when OSHA came out with the new silica standard. But if you had told workers that cloud over there is full of asbestos, they would have run as fast as they could away from that site. But when we look at silica, it was just sort of an accepted hazard. It's a dust cloud, whatever. But the effects on the body are very similar in the respiratory system to what you have with mesothelioma.
Right.
Well, thankfully that's changed over the years, but since the new silica standard come out. But silica standard is kind of complex. It's long. People don't understand the silica exposure control plan. That is super complex. It has medical surveillance that you have to do, including physical exams of workers. And what I find most commonly is, if anything, we're using wet methods, maybe N95s, and that's great. But the medical surveillance side of that is being lopped off.
Right, right. So I'm wondering if you've seen this, and I mean, I'm just going to make a suggestion because I think this is a wise thing to do in any industry when you're looking at health hazards. Well, we're looking at any hazards, okay? But let's just say you haven't previously in the oil and gas industry looked at the health hazards that you're potentially your employees are potentially exposed to, and what the medical monitoring is, and what records you're supposed to be keeping, and etc. I would think that it would be wise, and this is just me, to do something similar to what you do with your training plan, right? Your training matrix. You put the employees, on one axis, and you put the requirements and the hazards on the other axes, and then you look at who's exposed, and then you figure out what the monitoring that you have to be doing, and also what medical analyses, how often they need to be done, and etc. Right? You will find, and I'm thinking this. You do a lot more audits than I do. That people have no idea.
No clue.
Why? Why?
Well,
I mean, why are we training safety professionals, or why do we have safety professionals that aren't?
I think
aware?
Safety's hard. I refer to it as a practice. People don't really, in management and folks that really not dug down into safety, they think that we're glorified PPE checkers. I wish all I had to do in my business is run around and check people's PPE.
Tell them to put their hard hats on.
Put your hard hat on. And there's so many different aspects from a regulatory standpoint. You have construction standards, you have general industry standards, and then we ain't even going to get into the maritime and agricultural standards, right? And some of those standards are different depending on worker exposures and their exemptions and letters of interpretation. And it's a lot of study. And so, to your point earlier, you can't master everything, but what you can do is learn about your industry. I like to think of myself as a safety generalist with a specialty in oil and gas midstream and upstream operations, right? That doesn't mean I don't know anything about construction or manufacturing or some of these other things that come in there, but you got to focus on the area and the workers that you're trying to protect. And I really like your idea of creating a matrix, if you will, since this is the risk matrix.
That's right.
A matrix of exposure and the requirements. Here's one that is commonly missed. Noise exposure and hearing conservation. Okay.
Oh, everybody's got a program, right? Everybody's got a program.
And the workers may have earplugs, but we're not doing baselines and annual audiograms. And there are certain industries that are exempt from baselines and annual audiograms. For the most part, in general industry, manufacturing, things of that nature, you're supposed to be doing baselines and annual audiograms. That's one of those exposures that is not going to be immediate but chronic, right? We're not going to know 2 years later. So I want to tell you a quick story. So I was teaching trainer one time, and we were talking about hearing conservation. And an older gentleman in there asked me a question. He said, James, if you had to pick a sense to lose, you know, you're going to lose a sense. Which sense would you choose to lose? And I said, man, I don't know. He said, all right, let me break it down for you. Between hearing and seeing, which one would you choose to lose? And I said, I'd probably choose to lose my hearing over my vision. He said, I thought you would say that. But listen, seeing connects us to the world around us, but hearing connects us to people. And it struck me and it stuck with me over the years. And I remember, since we're filming this on Father's Day, my dad, as he got older, he was losing his hearing. He couldn't hear. And you could tell he couldn't hear because you would say something to him and he would answer inappropriately or just smile and say, yeah, right.
My dad's still around and he does that too. He has profound hearing loss.
Mm-hmm. So
some from the military, but just genetic.
All of that could have been prevented in the occupational exposure side. We can't do too much about genetics, but at work, we're routinely exposed to all that. So if you catch it early, you can put good prevention in place, but you can't catch it early if you're not doing baselines and annual audiograms. It's too late. You cannot repair your hearing, right? And so by a failure to do baselines and annuals, you don't see that gradual hearing loss that's happening over a career.
So let's talk about these annuals, right? Because I do have a client that does this correctly, right? They have a hearing protection program and they do monitoring in areas and they have hearing protection requirements and they have signs where the areas are and they do baseline and annual audiograms. But you also have to be looking for threshold shifts, right, in those audiograms. And so they also have a program and they track this with a company. Now this gets expensive, but you know what? You're supposed to be doing this. Okay. You're supposed to be doing this. Your occupational health and safety clinic is supposed to be looking at threshold shifts. And if somebody tests that they have a threshold shift, they have to be retested. And a professional needs to look at both of those and a questionnaire about their exposure to see if that goes on your OSHA log. Okay. They do this right. I've never seen another company do similar. And that doesn't mean that there aren't companies that are doing this, but I was thrilled to see that. But you have to, okay, and this goes into like, why don't people look at health? I think we don't go beyond what you said, the regulations, right? We don't learn about our industry. We don't get out in the field and look at the field or the shop floor and look at the task and really critically look at what people are being exposed to health-wise, not machine guarding, hazardous, it's sometimes hazardous materials, but the physical, I mean, like, oh, there's some, they're welding, so they got to do this. But are we looking at fumes? Are we looking at hazardous materials? Are we looking at, in Berg's situation, the health hazards related to what's being thrown in the air?
I thought and having just come back from their conference, I rarely say this about a company, but I am super impressed with their organization at Berg Demolition. They hold annually a safety conference for their employees where they bring all their employees in. They stop operations. They bring in all their employees. And I thought this was really cool because I went down. I was going to speak the second speaker of the day at their safety event in Baltimore this past week. And I noticed they've got a bunch of workers there with a third-party company, they're doing fit testing for APRs, right? And they had on the hoods and the nebulizers, and they're out there doing all that before the conference gets started. And I asked Chris about it. I said, what's going on here? He said, well, rather than keep up with a bunch of dates, what we do is we bring since we got all of our workers here, we do this today. And then we only have to keep up with one date unless there's a few stragglers,
Smart.
right? So every year when we have this event, we do respiratory fit test. And they come in a little early. They get the respiratory fit test going. They had a little area set out beside of them. They all had on the hoods, and it was pretty cool seeing everybody sitting there with their hoods on. And I said, I'm glad they're yellow, not black. People would think, something crazy was going on and SWAT was coming. But what an excellent method to stay organized and do it all at one time. And I think that's probably what happens in safety is we get behind and we're not proactive. We're always in a reactive mode. We're running. We got a million things to do. We've got to go out on sites, do site inspections, do training, manage verification systems, do incident investigations, corrective action plans, all these things that fill up somebody's day. And we never get ahead to where we can be proactive like Chris and his team are, where we say, okay, every year, on this date, respiratory fit test.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty cool.
So I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about with this company. Once you get it together and you get organized, it makes your life a little easier and it takes something off your plate for that everyday reactive mode, right? So let's talk about specific, if you don't mind, let's talk about specific industries. I think there's a lack of whether you come from education, right? You get an education, a bachelor's degree or master's degree, and you come into this field, or you get experience, or you have a mix of both, right? I think the lapse in the health part of the occupational health and safety is application of knowledge. I don't think it's ignorance.
No.
In some cases it might be ignorance, but application is there, right? So number one, we've talked about hazard identification, which I wholeheartedly think in cases where people aren't looking at health, they're not doing the hazard ID properly, whether it's on the company level or it's on the task level or both. Okay. So just from our experience, right? You're heavy oil and gas, upstream, midstream. What are, for our listeners, health hazards that are almost always an issue?
Well, certainly chemical health hazards related to hydrocarbons, vapors, hydrogen sulfide, you mentioned, norm, silica.
And what is norm? Let's for our listeners, because some people don't know.
Naturally occurring radioactive material, which is found in rocks and things when we're doing exploration. Very, very low dose, but chronic exposure can lead to cancer and other health ailments. And really, I think when we talk about these specific chemicals, where do I start? And this all blends together with your safety management system, HAZCOM. You start with a safety data sheet to determine what the physical and health hazards are of what the potential exposures are. But what I see in a lot of HAZCOM programs is we have general HAZCOM training. This is what a safety data sheet is.
Yeah.
You have the right to know. Blah, blah, blah.
Here's where they are.
Here's some pictograms, go check those out. But we really don't get beyond much just having a safety data sheet. Everybody knows they're supposed to have a safety data sheet. Here's my question. Who's looked at it? Who's looked at it to determine what the physical and health hazards are? If you're the safety professional and you don't know, the guys certainly don't know. So how do you set up a PPE matrix? How do you set up a training matrix? All these things fit together, right? So it goes beyond just having the pieces of the puzzle. We have to put the puzzle together.
Right.
Diesel particulate matter, diesel exhaust. And am I breathing that stuff in? Things that we don't consider from an exposure standpoint because we haven't done a really good job of hazard identification beyond the physical. Just not really thinking about
Hazards
the
are
health
best controlled.
in the design and planning stage of the work.
That's right. Right. So
I'm
it
glad I
just goes
don't have
back.
to send Fred Manuel $1 every time I say that, but shout out
I
to
know.
Fred.
I know. I wish, my wish for you is to meet him in person, because I hear he's lovely. Um, so let me say this. So I'm heavy construction. I think people know that, and in manufacturing and some pharma, right? And we talked about building materials. Okay.
Mhm.
And I mean, hazardous materials aside, the SDS sheets that you need for what you're working with, are you looking at the work for silica? Are you looking at it for noise? Are you looking at it for respiratory protection? Are you looking at it for PCBs? Are you looking at it for lead, asbestos? And here, let me scare you a little bit more. Nanomaterials in some of these building materials. Now people are adding nanomaterials, and the building materials are getting better, but the respiratory protection is sometimes not adequate, right? And they're
Right.
adding these carbon nanomaterials and things that are giving great properties to the building materials that people in construction are working with or demolishing, but we're not thinking them from a health hazard perspective. Um, what was the other one I just thought of? Oh, you said norm.
Norm.
Okay. Um, I work with a company that does tunneling. We were talking the other day about, why do we need a policy on radioactive exposure to radioactive material? Here's the thing. We live in New England. Okay. New England has radon. They also have naturally occurring radioactive material in some of the tunneling in the rocks and the
Right.
soil, right? I had a client. He pulled sheeting that had been in a tunneling project from a tunnel after 3 or 4 years of work. And guess what? It was radioactive, and he had to get rid of it. So that touches on the environmental portion, but then you have to think about the workers, right? Would you have thought of that?
No.
That was the first time. That was the first time that I was exposed to it, and it was an environmental capacity. But I think about it now in construction. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to say application. There's hazard identification, and then there's application of knowledge.
I would say a good source for safety professionals and risk managers that are listening to our podcast to begin a program is NIOSH. NIOSH has excellent resources.
Oh, that's great. And they also have, if you go to the NIOSH page, and I can't quote it directly, but if you go to NIOSH, they actually put the health hazards. They have a list, and you can go in there and look at some of the things that they have for each health hazard and how to deal with it, right?
Absolutely.
And it augments OSHA, okay? And sometimes it's not in the standard, but you need to know the hazards
Well, let's
before you
talk
start
about
putting
that
together.
for a second. Okay. I'm going to give you one where, Cal OSHA has a heat illness prevention standard. Federal OSHA does not have a heat illness prevention standard, although there is one coming soon, like weeks, no more than months, right? But OSHA recognizes, absent a standard, that heat is a recognized hazard, that excessive heat is harmful to workers. And so outside the state of California, people have this heat illness prevention plan. It sort of sits over here. It's got a bunch of words in it. We don't really do it. Warning to everyone. OSHA will cite you today under the general duty clause. They don't like to pull the general duty clause out much because there are a lot of defenses to that. But everybody recognizes that heat is a hazard. It is a health hazard, right? The workers, almost 1,000 workers this year in reported heat illness incidents and deaths, right? So that's one of those health hazards that we think about, right? but we don't really execute a plan. If I give some advice to safety professionals, OSHA's putting out a lot of communications related to heat and what the proposed standard is going to be. It's going to be modeled off the Cal OSHA standard, in which, you know, there's heat indices where you have to start implementing your plan. It's at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. Well, for those of us that live in the South, it's 80 degrees on Christmas sometimes, right?
You know what? I would take 80 degrees on Christmas here in New Hampshire. We're actually going to have 95-degree weather this week. And I don't know if some companies are going to be prepared for this, right? I mean, you down in the South, you guys work in this all the time. But I'm afraid that this week there's going to be a lot of news about workers, especially those that work outside and construction, and other outdoor industries, that we're going to have some heat
So
problems.
things that you would need to consider, you know, getting people acclimated, their general health, and what work assignments you're signing to those workers. Cool, potable water, shade, those things have to happen in the planning of the work. You can't just go out and say, y'all guys, you know, make sure you drink a lot of water, right? There's specifics in that standard to protect workers. So that's one of those things that we just, well, if we get hot, you know, maybe they'll be go sit down and drink a bottle of water. You need to have a plan for that.
A plan, right? And I was just going to say this. I was waiting for an opening there. Listen, if you don't think, if somebody gets hurt, right, and it's a recordable or a death or a serious injury because of the heat stroke, whatever, somebody goes to the hospital. If you don't think that OSHA is going to ask you for your plan, what was your plan and were you monitoring, right?
Absolutely.
It's not enough to say, well, we told them to drink water, right? Somebody needs to be there, either whether it's a superintendent, foreman, whatever, and there needs to be a plan for making sure that people are following the heat stress policy or whatever. Okay.
You know, that's one of the things inside that I think people will be surprised about is training related to heat illness prevention, right? So out of the Cal OSHA standard, which I'm fully anticipating we'll see inside the standard for the federal one once it gets published, is training for supervisors. Supervisors have to be trained on the planning portion of this, on recognizing signs and symptoms of heat stress before it becomes heat stroke and heat illness and all that. Are you doing that? Or do you have just a simple, you know, it's hot outside, drink a lot of water? I remember, and be clear about your instructions.
Right.
During the oil spill, I had a student,
ahead.
we had a policy, right? Because we had a lot of water. We was down there in a lot of heat. People came from all over the country. They're working on the beaches. We sent more people to the hospital with heat stress than we ever did from exposures to hydrocarbons. It was so bad, we actually had ambulances queued up on the beaches where we were working because of the heat situation.
Wow.
Now, in the training we provided, I told them for every Gatorade you drank, you needed to drink 3 bottles of water. Well, I wasn't clear in my instructions, evidently, because some student comes back and said, Mr. James, you got me fired. I said, well, how did I get you fired, man? He's like, I did what you told me to. I drank a Gatorade and then slammed 3 bottles of water and got sick and threw up. And they told me I was too dumb to work in picking up oil on the beach. And they fired me. But really, it was my fault because I should have gave specific instructions, like drink a Gatorade, then at your next break, drink a bottle of water, then another bottle of water, then space it out. Don't just slam Gatorade all day. So what's the point? Having those things there is important, but instructing people how to use and properly hydrate is super important, because what I find, and I do this working around the house, is I get behind on the hydration portion, right? Until you don't feel good and you're sweating and you feel a little lightheaded, you got to go inside. So check out that heat stress, that stuff's coming. It's coming, and it's coming soon.
Yeah. So let me kind of provide, yeah, I don't know if it's too soon for a wrap up, but let me provide this, right? I think you made a really good point at the beginning of this discussion, right? We talk about EHS, OHS, HSE, HSEQ, whatever, right? And the S is always super big. Okay. And maybe we'll have another show that we talk about the environmental, right? Because that's in my wheelhouse also. Um, but one of the things that's very important, right, is if if you want to have a well-balanced safety management system, a well-balanced program, if you want to understand what the H is, right, you have to be a student of the work, student of the physical of the hazard identification process, right? If this is not your wheelhouse, there are people that this is their wheelhouse, right? Industrial hygienists, people who audit, like James, right? That go in and audit and look at the work for you, because sometimes you get so close to, or you're so busy, you get so close to the work that you don't see with eyes of another professional or somebody that does this all the time. So my suggestion is, if I may, is, you know, if you got a good safety management system, hire an outside professional to do an audit to help you with the H, to help you with the E, even to help you with the Q, right? If you're HSEQ quality, right? Or HSEQ S sustainability, right? If have somebody come in and help you look at your program, which whether it costs you a couple hours or a day of report, it's worth it, because you don't want to be missing the matrix for what these health hazards, right? You don't want to be missing the matrix for the environmental. You don't want to be missing the matrix for the sustainability, because at some point, there will be an evolution. I'm going to be predictive here because I know James is working on this problem as part of his dissertation. There's going to be an evolution beyond just checking the box and getting an A in a system, right? There's going to be an evolution of people checking this. So do yourself a favor and have somebody check it first. That's my soapbox right there.
There you go. And I'm going to, in parting comment, I'm going to say this. Safety is hard. It's hard.
It is.
There's a lot to consider when it comes to health, safety, and environmental. Each of those is a job almost within itself, depending on what kind of industry you're in and what workers' exposures are. You, as a professional, need to continue to grow. Too many times, what I find is we get a designation, we get a degree, we get some experience, we spike the football, and we stop learning. So no one's going to tell you to do this. No one's going to be over your shoulder, assuring your professional development is going the way it needs to go. But you, as a safety professional, owe it to the workers that you are entrusted with their safety management system to continue to grow, continue to educate yourself in identifying the hazards so we can get the proper protections in place. And so that's my parting comment. Thank you for all who follow us here. We've just celebrated our 50th podcast, our 50th episode of the Risk Matrix, right? 50. Crazy.
50.
Can't believe
50.
we've been doing it this long. But
I love this.
I love it too. Thank you very much for all of you who listen to the podcast. Remember, you can follow us there on YouTube. Go over there on the Veriforce YouTube channel. What are we going to do, Dr. Martin?
We're going to like it, and we're going to smash that subscribe button. And listen, I want you to tell you that we really appreciate our subscribers. We appreciate your feedback, and I mean, anything that we talk about on this program, feel free to reach out to James or myself if you want to discuss some of these things more. If you want to bat things around, I think some of the things that we talk about maybe might be just pleasant banter, but we do actually do this stuff for a living. So reach out to the Veriforce Network and be a part of the Risk Matrix. Come on in.
Hey, We're always looking for interesting guests. If you've got something you're super passionate about and you want to get on here and throw it out here to the world, come on, shoot us a message on LinkedIn. We're not hard to find on there. I get messages on LinkedIn from listeners pretty frequently
all the time
about
Me
stuff
too.
we've talked about on the podcast. So jump over there, shoot us a message. We'd love to have you on. We'll get you scheduled up and get you out here so you can share your knowledge with us and with our listeners. We're also on Spotify. Go over there, that Spotify channel. I love Spotify. It sets a reminder, lets me know when the latest episode of the Risk Matrix has been posted. Every Tuesday around lunchtime, Veriforce will post an episode of the Risk Matrix. But thank you guys for listening to us. And most importantly, thank you for what you do to bring workers home safe from high hazard jobs.
We appreciate you.
Till next time, out.